皆様、こんにちは。ミッキー京子です。今日はですね、オースティンに来ていただいています。そして、ホームインスペクションについて質問します。彼はですね、えーっと、ポッドキャストをなさってたんですね。で、それを私は見せてもらいました。で、それを見たことによって、いくつか質問事項ができました。と言いますのは、私は今住んでいるところに、2年半前に引っ越してきたんですね。その時にホームインスペクションがありまして、ちょっといろいろ問題があったんですよ。ですから、彼に聞いてみたいと思います。Austin, what
Yes.
I was saying was that 2.5 years ago,
hmm
I moved here. I bought this house and we hired somebody to do home inspection
hmm
and we had some problems. Not with him. I'll tell you. Through this experience, I like to ask you some questions.
Sure.
Number one, I completely forgot how it works. Um, After inspection, if the buyer asks the seller to fix something, it has to be fixed before the closing date.
So it depends.
It depends.
So there are a couple of things it depends on, and I'm not sure if it may be regional. So I don't know if the process in North Carolina may be different in Florida. But I know in Florida there are a couple of different contracts that can be used in the real estate transaction. The one that's the most popular is what they call the as is contract.
Yes.
And so that means that the seller is basically saying, I'm selling this home as is. So you can ask the seller, can you fix these items? But if the contract is an as is contract, the seller is not obligated to fix anything. So they could say, no, we're not going to fix it because you knew when you put an offer on this home that we were selling it in the condition that it's currently in.
I see.
But that being said, and that's where working with a good real estate agent helps because they can go to the seller and say, let's try and work this out where maybe let's say the home needs a new roof and it's going to cost $10,000. The seller may be willing to put in 5,000. So they're saying we still want to help out, but we're not going to cover the full cost because we're not responsible for doing that. So, in your question though, as far as when something would need to be fixed,
Yes.
it would depend on if the seller's going to fix it or if they're going to give you money, which you usually get at closing, or they may reduce the asking price on the home by the amount that they're going to concede. So it really depends on which of those paths the seller decides to go down.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
There's a
goodness.
lot.
Well, I'll say something in Japanese.
Sure.
私が尋ねたのはですね、ホームインスペクションがありました。問題があります。それで、セラーに直してくださいと言って、その直すのは、クロージングデートまでに直さなければならないのかどうかを尋ねました。彼のアンサーは、ステートによってちょっと違うと思う。彼はフロリダで働いてらっしゃるんですよね。私はノースカロライナにいます。ですからちょっとルールが違うかもしれないけれども、一般的に言えば、まずセラーが私は as is で sell と言えば、もうこれ以上何もしないということなんですね。で、そういうふうに言わない人で直すという場合はですね、私のセラーがお金を半分払います。だからあとやってください。あるいは今これだけの値段で売り出していますが、金額をちょっと下げますとか、そういういろいろなやり方があるというんですね。Austin, what we did was we had many problems. And I knew the seller couldn't fix it before closing date.
Mm-hmm.
I thought everything has to be done before closing date. I just thought so. Uh, and it took time just hiring an inspector and make an appointment. And he came and waiting for the report. And I knew there aren't many weeks
Hmm.
before closing date.
Right?
So what I did was I said nothing. I
Hmm.
said nothing, although there are many problems. I even didn't know I can ask them to reduce the price,
Hmm.
but you can do that.
You can, and that really would be the realtor that you're working with. They would be the ones that would say, okay, here are the options, or what would you like to ask the seller to do? And
Hmm.
then your realtor would then talk with the seller's realtor and say, the buyer would like you to go down this path.
Yes.
The seller could say no, right? But you don't know if you don't ask. And so that's why, it's worth having those conversations. And I have a friend who, him and his wife just purchased a home about a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
And they came into a similar situation where they wanted to ask the seller to
Hmm.
help cover the cost of a new roof and new windows because they knew both were issues.
Oh.
Their realtor that they were working with kind of made it sound like he was already assuming the seller wouldn't pay for any of it, so he didn't even want to ask. But
Oh.
my friends were like, well, let's just ask. What's the harm? They're going to say no. Okay, at least we tried.
Yes.
So they asked, and the seller made concessions. They were going to help pay for half the roof and half the cost of the windows. So that, they thankfully pushed back on their realtor to say, ask the question. Even if you think they're going to say no, just ask it. But sometimes people they automatically assume, and not to say that the realtors are bad or they're not doing a good job, but you automatically assume that they're going to do everything they can
Mm.
when sometimes you just may need to push them a little bit more.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow, it's good to know.
Yeah.
Next time.
Next time, exactly.
And this time, our inspector did a wonderful job, except for one, he didn't remove the furniture.
Hmm.
One furniture was a dresser in the basement. He didn't remove, so he didn't know there was a mold
Hmm.
behind. And after, anyway, seller kindly left the dresser for us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So when we removed, we found a mold, and it turned out that the entire area was just taken away, and then dig the soil and then put a pipe, and
Hmm.
it was a big problem. I mean, we had to pay a lot.
Right.
And I never said anything to the inspector, but I like to ask you if I'm not asking him to pay anything, but
Hmm.
is it kind if I tell him what happened? Then from next time, he will check behind the furniture, or I shouldn't say anything. What do you
Yeah,
think?
that's a good question. So part of it's going to come down to what is considered standard for a home inspection.
Mhm.
Any inspector that you hire, they're not going to move furniture. So
Oh,
that's part of a standard of the home inspection process is the inspectors, they don't move
oh,
big things like furniture because it's a potential risk to the inspector if they damage something that's the seller's item. Now the inspector is responsible for paying for any
you were
damages.
saying in your
Yeah. So that, regardless of who the company is or who the inspector is, I would just go into it with the expectation they're not going to be able to move
Hmm.
furniture out of the way. That being said, and it's hard to say without having been there or seeing the report, but if the mold was a widespread issue, then the question comes down to were there other signs that maybe the inspector missed or didn't see, right? So that's where, once again, it still doesn't hurt to go to the inspector and say, hey, like I understand you couldn't move the dresser, right? That's not part of the process, but we found all this mold after the inspection.
Yes.
Is there, even if he can't like say I'm going to pay for it, maybe he could provide guidance on what could have caused it or who to reach out to get it fixed or what to do to prevent it in the future.
Oh.
Or he may say, I wasn't responsible for moving that dresser, but I feel bad, so I'm going to refund your inspection, right? So that's one of those things too where it doesn't hurt to have a conversation just because, you don't know what's going to come of it.
I see. Until I show you film, I didn't know you're not supposed to move the phone.
Yeah,
I understand because if you damage something by moving something, then that's your responsibility. So, yeah, now I understand. Well, in that case, next time, maybe I can ask the seller to move the furniture a little bit so that inspector can see the wall behind, I mean, behind the furniture.
right.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say too is so usually, like that's very common when we do an inspection that there's furniture there.
Mhm.
And so that's going to cause limitations on what the inspector can see.
Yeah.
But in most instances, when the buyer does their final walkthrough before closing,
Yes.
usually the furniture isn't there because the seller moved it because they're taking it with them.
Yeah.
So that may be when the buyer can catch things that the inspector couldn't see because there was furniture, or let's say like a decorative carpet in the living room that the seller's now taken with them. But in your instance, it doesn't help that the seller said, we're leaving you the dresser because well, then you still couldn't see it, right? Right. Um, so yeah, so that would be something where if there is a potential concern, you could ask the seller, can you please just move the dresser out of the way of the inspector so they can look at it? Yeah.
Yes, yes. I think I will do that next time. Yeah, it's a good lesson.
Hmm.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And then, um, oh, well, for instance, suppose I move to somewhere I've never been, I
Hmm.
don't have any friends, then is there any point I should look in order to find a good inspector?
Yeah, so if you're looking to move somewhere,
Mm,
I would say most often than not, the real estate agent that you choose to work with is going to have their own recommendations. Yeah.
realtor.
Yeah, so usually they'll have two or three companies that they can recommend to you that they've worked with,
Hmm.
for a while. So they know who the inspector is, they know their reputation, so they can give you that recommendation and say, here's somebody I think you should call.
I see.
Now, that being said, I always think it's good for people to do their own research.
Oh,
So if you go online, if you go on Google and you search home inspector and you
yes,
search the area you're moving to, that should pull up a list of local inspectors
yes.
and you can then see their reviews. So
Oh,
you can see, are they rated 1 star or are they rated 5 stars, right? And that's going to be a big difference on who you choose.
yes.
Or, was their last review
Hmm.
from 2019?
Hmm.
So then are they even in business anymore, right?
That's right.
And then how many reviews they have. So
Mm,
if somebody only has a couple, I
mhm.
mean, they may be new in the business, which is not a bad thing, right? Everybody starts somewhere.
Yes.
But if you see a company has thousands of reviews and
Mhm.
they're positive, then
Mm.
that may be a good company that you choose.
Yes,
So
that's
yeah,
right.
I would say so realtor would be a good place to start
Mhm.
because they'll have people they know and trust. But if you want to do your own research, just doing a Google search of home inspector and then the city that you're looking for.
Mm. Well, Austin said something, well, interesting thing and then valuable thing. So I'll say in Japanese.
Sure.
私が知らない場所に引っ越すとしますね。で、そこで家を買う。その時に、good inspector を探す手段は何がありますかって聞きましたら、オースティンはまず第一にリアルターに聞きなさいということなんですね。そこのリアルターは結局いろんな人たちを知っていますから、そこでいいと思う人を多分紹介してくれるでしょう。あるいは Google Search ですね。いろいろなインスペクションのインスペクターを持っている会社がありますから、そこ Google Search して、このスターがありますよね、星が。で、いくつついているのか、そしてレビューがいくつあるのか、その内容は何かっていうようなことを調べることによって、私自身もある程度の知識が入るようになりますということです。Thank you. That's a good advice.
Absolutely.
Yes. Now, don't you think we are very convenient to see like a Google search, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Before, we couldn't do that.
No, and one of the nice things about being able to do that now
Mm,
is you can see what people are actually experiencing. Because, if you go just based on your realtor's recommendation, that's one person telling you this is a good inspector.
Right.
Whereas when you go online, you can see hundreds of people telling you, is this a good inspector or not? So it's beneficial because it gives you a more practical example of what people are experiencing when they use that company.
Yes, I understand. Oh my goodness, it's time.
Okay.
時間が来ました。Austin, thank you so very much.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Everybody, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Well then, goodbye.